ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Techtonics. This is our second episode where we're going to explore innovation in India. Today, to join me, I have Amrit Acharya, who's the CEO and co-founder of Zetwerk. Zetwerk is a platform that enables B2B custom manufacturing. Also with us is Arvind Nair, one of my colleagues from Standard Chartered, based in India and looking after tech companies. Welcome to both of you. Amrit, we're going to kick off with your company, Zetwerk. It'd be great to get a bit of an understanding of what exactly it does.
We are what we call a managed marketplace for custom manufacturing. On the demand side, we work with mid to large companies who want to get products made. We partner with these companies when these products are existing only like conceptually. They're existing either on software or piece of paper or sometimes even in their brains. And we take that idea and convert it into a physical product. The role we play as a company is matchmaking with the right manufacturer, solving for pricing, and ultimately solving for fulfillment.
If you look at your background, you know, you've got some consulting background and things like that, but it's not like you've got 30 years in manufacturing or anything like that. So why manufacturing?
My first job when I graduated from undergrad and joined this large company at ITC was to build a new factory for them. So I was just 21, 22 and I didn't know what I was doing honestly, but I was somehow the company felt that they could trust me with managing hundreds of millions of spend, hiring thousands of people, and I was doing this entire activity on Google Sheets and Excel. But I really fell in love with manufacturing at that point. Like I really like how things are built. At the heart, I'm an engineer, and so are my co-founders. We fell in love with what we are doing, and we continue to fall in love with it every day.
What's the difference between you and your co-founder?
Me and my co-founder, we met in undergrad, so we go back a long way. We also had our first jobs together at this large company in India called ITC. We kind of grew up together, and today we split the business between us. Like he looks after some of the business functions, and I spend a lot of time on the technology piece, the product, and building out, you know, the various corporate teams to make sure that we are doing whatever we need to do to build the company.
What do you think are the toughest things you have to face as an entrepreneur? And are there specific things to Indian entrepreneurship that make it particularly difficult?
My parents were in academia, so I have no context of business at all. Nobody has taught me how to be a CEO or where I should spend time. Luckily, we have good mentors and we have a great board and we have good investors, so we get some support that way. And that way, the Indian ecosystem has matured a lot in the last 10 years. I thought me and Arvind were having a brief conversation. Arvind's also an ex-entrepreneur. And the world between back then and today is so different. I spent some time in the US. A lot of things which feel simpler in the US are tougher in India. It starts with infrastructure. Like we are still a emerging country, so things don't work always as they should. And then there are certain indices or metrics in which we are again very early in our growth journey. Credit is one example where India is a highly underpenetrated market. Hopefully that will change over the lifetime of our business. But today, because we are still early in that journey, those create challenges.
I actually spent 20 years as an entrepreneur myself. So I had 8 of my own technology companies, mostly in the SaaS space as well. So yes, I speak the same language. So Arvind, your company, what space was your company in?
So my company was into education products. So I was developing a product for kids. It would be a subscription-based learning product delivered offline.
Do the problems that Amrit was talking about, do they resonate with you too?
So I struggled with raising capital. I struggled with logistics because at that point of time we didn't have as many logistics setups as there are today. And I struggled with the entire customer acquisition piece because going back that time, there was no method of acquiring customers through digital channels. Besides all of that, and it's funny that I'm saying this, that I also struggled to raise working capital. So these were the multiple struggles that I faced 10 years back.
Arvind, from a Stand Chart perspective, you know, you're looking after tech clients. So obviously these problems, as you said, some of them still exist. Are we able to help on the ground in India?
From a Stand Chart India perspective, we've significantly worked on our tech capabilities to build out what we today believe is a superior digital solution for clients in this space, in the form of our cash management solutions, our API capabilities. Also, our transaction processing speeds today in the market are like best in class. As Amrit mentioned, the credit is often a challenge, and today we have evolved a method in which we are able to underwrite this credit. We've started doing alternate credit assessment to try and provide credit to companies like Amrit or their suppliers. We also have been trying to bring various other parts of the bank to this. For a company like Zetwerk, for example, capital structuring and advisory related to that, we are in a position to provide currency risk management solutions to them. So it's a full suite of banking products based on a digital/API technology base.
Amrit, in terms of your expansion plans, what do you anticipate will be the biggest issues that you're going to need to solve?
Today, almost 20% of our revenue comes from outside of India, and a big part of that is US and a little bit of Europe. We are building all of this from India. Like 100% of our headcount is in India, but our revenues is diversified. Some of the problems that we solved 2 years ago in India, we'll have to start from scratch in some of these international markets. For example, we have a subsidiary in the US, but we don't have a balance sheet there yet. And how do you build a balance sheet, from scratch without the need of equity? I think those are all important problems that we need to address. Currency is one thing, advisory is one thing. When do we want to go public at some point? I think those are all questions we will tackle as we enter this phase of our journey. Really having a partner who can help us with that is something which is super important for us.
When you set up your company, I mean, obviously everybody dreams of, this massive success, but it's been so quick. Has it slightly surprised you?
Every day we get positive surprises. Like if I look back 4 years back, I was telling Arvind, like when we started the business, I had a one year deadline from my father that I need to figure things out before I get married, and I was working against the clock then.
What he didn't tell you is the deadline from the wife to be as well.
She's been a true partner. Like both of us were in the US, and we decided to move back to India together. We didn't really know what we would do, but we knew that we wanted to spend the next few years here, and it's worked out well.
Do you think if you had opened in the States, you would have been able to have managed that as successfully?
I think the answer is probably no, because a lot of the problems that we set out to solve, they exist in the US as well, like the challenge of reliable manufacturing, the challenge of quality being perfect. But they are 100x magnified in a country like ours, which is still early in our journey of building stable infrastructure. End of the day, we are what we would call an infrastructure company. We are building the pipes of our country in some way, and we are making sure that the ultimate promise is met. If a customer says that I want this product made in 30 days, how do you ensure that happens in 30 days time and again? In a market like the US, those things fail less often than they do in India. And hence the value prop with which we go to the US today is also very different from the value prop we offer in our home country. So building that base infrastructure through which the company organization can be built, the technology can be built, I don't think it would have been possible to do this in a more mature market. Ours is a very emerging market story.
When you think of entrepreneurs, we all sit in a room, maybe have a co-founder, and we're working it out as we go, right? Now, the one role that does seem to be difficult to evolve, it seems to be one that tends to be brought in later, is when companies go public, right? That's often that CFO role. Did you start with a CFO from the start?
We have an amazing CFO today. Like he was previously the CFO of a large oil and gas services company, and definitely we punched above our weight, when we brought him on board. But that's been our general philosophy as well. As founders, we want to do as little work as possible, like that we can get by, and the way to do that is to bring people better than us. We forward hire a lot. Often they may be a little bit overspec'd for the scale of the company at that point in time. But considering the pace of growth, we've always felt that those bets work out better than we think.
Do you see that same pattern in the successful companies that you have, or particularly where the CFO is concerned?
Over the last, I would say, 24 to 36 months, most of the tech companies in India have been getting CFOs. And in fact, I would go on to say even CHROs and marketing heads from the main industry companies. That's clearly a part of the ecosystem that's developed. Having said that, me and Amrit were discussing that there's a massive talent churn happening in the sector. So there's a lot of switching happening. There's a lot of job changes which have been happening within the sector, which we believe might not sustain over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years.
Very early on, we got an advice which stayed with me. The company, end of the day, is nothing but a collection of people. You'll build software, you build customers, etc. All of that is great, but ultimately it's people who build the company. At some point, if we take care of the org takes care of you. So we've run the company with that mindset.
Arvind, you mentioned about the churn and the churn in people. Is that from big to small? Are you seeing it more emerging because of a desire, an appetite for entrepreneurialism?
So there is an overall move in the country towards, let's say, joining startups. So maybe, let's say, 20 years back, that would not have been imaginable. Everyone wanted to work for the large banks, the large FMCG companies, and stuff like that. But cut to today, there is clearly an appetite amongst the people coming into the workforce to work for newer age companies. So that's a clear trend. But the mega trend, I think, is the fact that 20 years back in India, it wouldn't have been imaginable that you work in a startup right out of engineering or out of business school. But today, it is in fact the choice.
It's been fascinating watching that, obviously having been in the entrepreneurial space for a very long time. You saw it happen in the US and they were seen as the sort of mavericks. And then in China it became sort of, let's copy your model. There was a switch of mindset and then they just took off. The number of unicorns, and they had all these engineers which really brought about this creative thinking. And now we're seeing that with India. So if you look at last year and how many unicorns came out of India, do you think the initiatives that have been rolled out in India have had anything to do with that? So for example, the digital identity, a lot more of the infrastructure, and also bringing the country together in a much less fragmented manner.
I think a lot of these things today are very different from 4 or 5 years ago. The last one you mentioned on a single tax structure for the entire country. I don't think our business would have existed without that. And then there are many other things like UPI, which is a single payment stack across banks, across consumers, which make payments easier. Last year, in addition to a lot of unicorns, a lot of Indian companies also went public. And these are companies like Zomato, Nykaa, who have been stalwarts and of the Indian tech boom for a long period of time. And seeing these companies go public, a new class of investors got introduced to these companies as well, who could buy these stocks on the retail exchange. So it's a combination of these things. I think startups in general have become more mainstream, and like even my mother, she wanted to buy Bitcoin recently. So it's just a level of awareness which also was not there before.
Arvind, how about you? You've got any other experiences? You're working with a lot of younger companies, a lot of tech companies. Any other drivers, or what do you think their big drivers are?
The key drivers clearly have been the payments interface, which Amrit mentioned, the UPI, the Aadhaar card, which was also the unique identity card which the government introduced, and the GST, or the common sales tax regime which the government introduced. These have been 3 very critical initiatives in the last 5 years. But also, let's say today the government's got a production linked incentive or a PLI scheme in place, which is essentially to encourage companies to create more manufacturing capacity in India. And that's now a very critical driver, a demand driver for, let's say, Amrit's business. So the government, I think, has continuously been doing some of these initiatives which have been spurring on the growth. Another initiative I want to add is the Make in India movement. And similarly, there's been a Startup India wave. So there have been multiple initiatives taken by the government which have been a driver at one level. Of course, the other level has been the success of some of the large tech companies, which has spurred an entire new generation of such companies. India has always had a quality tech employment pool. And I think that's over the years, and that's a lot of that has been the story of Indian IT. But in a sense, the entire new economy space is kind of an extension of that wave of Indian IT, which was unleashed in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Do you think obviously the opportunities have arisen, we've got the right environment, we've got role models. Do you think, and also probably we've got parents who are a little bit more accepting, you know, when you look at what happened in China, you know, you went from, no, you will be an engineer, you will be a doctor or whatever it was, and suddenly it was like, yeah, go forth, my child, you may go and become an entrepreneur. But do you think anything's happened in the Indian mindset for entrepreneurialism?
I mean, 1000%. Like my parents have been extremely supportive, but as I was saying earlier, like even when I quit my job at McKinsey, came back from the US, it was still a challenge to convince my parents that this is the right path for me. When we were hiring for engineers, we used to lose out on a lot of people who instead chose to work with a larger company, and they found joining an earlier company was risky. And you can extend that attitude to an entrepreneur who would start a company and not have the same level of support from their families to begin with. We have definitely seen that change. A big part of that is just talking about it and sharing stories.
If we're looking at the world and technology as a whole, I mean, what do you think the biggest trends are going to be in the next 10 years?
This whole remote working versus hybrid working, I think this is a trend that's somewhat here to stay. I'm actually working out of the place I grew up in, which is different from where the company is headquartered. And I think companies which can adopt that right mix, that's something which can be a competitive moat and advantage. It allows you to access a wider range of talent pool. The second big trend is this whole global reorganization of supply chains that got accelerated a big way in the last 1 year. Third thing is, I think digital adoption in general is again here to stay. Last 1 year, our business transitioned from a good to have product to a must have product. A lot of the growth that we saw was just that slight change in perception. So we were able to compress years of company building into months.
Are we seeing among clients more and more of them beginning to think how to move into the green space? Obviously, for the more traditional industries, that, you know, they're being pressured by regulation and things like that. But for the tech industry, who tend to be younger, do you see that there is a beginning to think about products and how to design their companies in such a way that really takes sustainability into account?
There is a clear thinking amongst both Indian companies and the Indian consumers to opt for more sustainable options. A good example would be, there is clearly a very high demand for electric vehicles today in the country. There is a clear demand among the younger consumers to go sustainable, to go green. There's a clear thinking amongst companies as well to go sustainable and green. But I would think in certain product categories, the price of these sustainable options needs to come down for it to become mass market in a country like India.
You'll be very aware, obviously, of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, things like clean water, gender balance, poverty, and how we fight these things. Have you seen that a change in India? Have you seen many initiatives around this space, Amrit?
The reality is that when we talk to some customers today, like especially when we have customers outside India, it is a part of the conversation, like ESG, compliance, sustainability. You can't do business in countries like US or Europe without talking about these and having a point of view. What happens is some of these things start trickling down to the rest of the org as well. So we are in that journey where some of it is being led through kind of external factors, but then it is compounding and creating a little bit of change in culture. We like that positioning a lot of what a company's responsibility is in society. Now, how much you can do at any point in time, there is always various variables which determine that, but certainly as a culture we think about it a lot.
Do you notice there's a big change, or that there are initiatives being pushed out to really promote this, and that it's become a fact that's important in India?
I think India became 100% electrified maybe last year or the year before. It's not a very long while ago. And when you look at drinking water, there's still sizable percentage of Indian households who don't have access to clean drinking water. Some of these things which we take for granted in advanced economies, we are still very early in our journey. So So it's both an opportunity and you can also build a business around it.
Thank you both very much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and it's been really an insight into what are the factors that's really creating this environment and nurturing these unicorns and these tech companies as they grow. And I think we can all expect to see some really great developments in the space in the next year and beyond.